Hi there, Speedy Read team, and welcome back to Northern Lights by Phillip Pullman. This is episode number 3. We've got to page 21. So, I'm going to carry on. Starting 15 minutes from now, let's have a Speedy Read. And he put the first slide into the frame and slid it behind the lens. A circular photogram in sharp black and white appeared on the screen. It had been taken at night under a full moon, and it showed a wooden hut in the middle distance, its walls dark against the snow that surrounded it and lay thickly on the roof. Beside the hut stood an array of philosophical instruments, which looked to Lyra's eye like something from the Anne Barrett Park on the road to Yarnton. Aerials, wires, porcelain insulators, all glittering in the moonlight and thickly covered in frost. A man in furs, his face hardly visible in the deep hood of his garment, stood in the foreground, with his hand raised as if in greeting. To one side of him stood a smaller figure. The moonlight bathed everything in the same pallid gleam. That photogram was taken with a standard silver nitrate emulsion, Lord Asriel said. I'd like you to look at another one, taken from the same spot only a minute later, with a new, specially prepared emulsion. He lifted out the first slide and dropped another into the frame. This was much darker. It was as if the moonlight had been filtered out. The horizon was still visible, with the dark shape of the hut and its light snow-covered roof standing out, but the complexity of the instruments was hidden in darkness. But the man had altogether changed. He was bathed in light, and a fountain of glowing particles seemed to be streaming from his upraised hand. That light, said the chaplain, is it going up or coming down? It's coming down, said Lord Asriel, but it isn't light, it's dust. Something in the way he said it made Lyra imagine dust with a capital letter, as if it wasn't ordinary dust. The reaction of the scholars confirmed her feeling, because Lord Asriel's words caused a sudden collective silence, followed by gasps of incredulity. But how? Surely it can't. Gentlemen, came the voice of the chaplain, let Lord Asriel explain. It's dust, Lord Asriel repeated. It registered as light on the plate because particles of dust affect this emulsion as photons affect silver nitrate emulsion. It was partly to test it that my expedition went north in the first place. As you see, the figure of the man is perfectly visible. Now, I'd like you to look at the shape to his left. He indicated the blurred shape of the smaller figure. I thought that was the man's demon, said the inquirer. No, his demon was at the time coiled around his neck in the form of a snake. That shape you can dimly see is a child. A severed child, said someone, and the way he stopped showed that he knew this was something that shouldn't have been voiced. There was an intense silence. Then Lord Asriel said calmly, an entire child, which, given the nature of dust, is precisely the point, is it not? No one spoke for several seconds. Then came the voice of the chaplain. Ah, he said, like a thirsty man who, having just drunk deeply, puts down the glass to let out the breath he has held while drinking. And the streams of dust come from the sky and bathe him in what looks like light. You may examine this picture as closely as you wish. I'll leave it behind when I go. I'm showing it to you now to demonstrate the effect of this new emulsion. Now, I'd like to show you another picture. He changed the slide. The next picture was also taken at night, but this time without moonlight. It showed a small group of tents in the foreground, dimly outlined against the low horizon, and beside them an untidy heap of wooden boxes and a sledge. But the main interest of the picture lay in the sky. Streams and veils of light hung like curtains, looped and festooned on invisible hooks hundreds of miles high, all blowing out sideways in the stream of some unimaginable wind. What is that? Said the voice of the sub-rector. It's a picture of the aurora. It's a very fine photogram, said the Palmerian professor. One of the best I've seen. Forgive my ignorance, said the shaky voice of the old precentor, but if I ever knew what the aurora was, I have forgotten. Is it what they call the northern lights? Yes, it has many names. It's composed of storms of charged particles and solar rays of intense and extraordinary strength. invisible in themselves, but causing this luminous radiation when they interact with the atmosphere. If there had been time, I would have had this slide tinted to show you the colours, pale green and rose, for the most part, with a tinge of crimson along the lower edge of the curtain-like formation. This is taken with ordinary emulsion. Now, I'd like you to look at a picture taken with this special emulsion. He took out the slide. Lyra heard the master say quietly, "If he forces a vote, we could try to invoke the residence clause. He hasn't been resident in the college for 30 weeks out of the last 52. He's already got the chaplain on his side," the librarian murmured in reply. Lord Asriel put a new slide in the lantern frame. It showed the same scene. As with the previous pair of pictures, many of the features visible by ordinary light were much dimmer in this one, and so were the curtains of the radiance in the sky. But in the middle of the aurora, high above the bleak landscape, Lyra could see something solid. She pressed her face to the crack to see more clearly, and she could see scholars near the screen leaning forward too. As she gazed, her wonder grew, because there in the sky was the unmistakable outline of a city. Towers, domes, walls, buildings and streets, suspended in the air. She nearly gasped with wonder. The Cassington scholar said, "That looks like a city." "Exactly so," said Lord Asriel. "A city in another world, no doubt," said the Dean, with contempt in his voice. Lord Asriel ignored him. There was a stir of excitement among some of the scholars, as if, having written treatises on the existence of the unicorn without ever having seen one, they had been presented with a living example newly captured. "Is this the Barnard Stokes business?" said the Palmerian professor. "It is, isn't it?" "That's what I want to find out," said Lord Asriel. He stood to one side of the illuminated screen. Lyra could see his dark eyes searching among the scholars as they peered up at the slide of the aurora and the green glow of his demon's eyes beside him. All the venerable heads were craning forward, their spectacles glinting. Only the master and the librarian leant back in their chairs with their heads close together. The chaplain was saying, "You said you were searching for news of the Grumman expedition, Lord Asriel. Was Dr. Grumman investigating this phenomenon too?" "I believe he was, and I believe he had a good deal of information about it. But he won't be able to tell us what it was because he's dead." "No," said the chaplain. "I'm afraid so, and I have proof here." A ripple of excited apprehension ran round the retiring room as, under Lord Asriel's direction, 2 or 3 of the younger scholars carried the wooden box to the front of the room. Lord Asriel took out the last slide, but left the lantern on, and in the dramatic glare of the circle of light he bent to lever open the box. Lyra heard the screech of nails coming out of the damp wood. The master stood up to look, blocking Lyra's view. Her uncle spoke again. "If you remember, Grumman's expedition vanished 18 months ago. The German Academy sent him up there to go as far north as the magnetic pole and make various celestial observations. It was in the course of that journey that he observed the curious phenomenon we've already seen. Shortly after that, he vanished. It's been assumed that he had an accident and that his body's been lying in a crevasse all this time. In fact, there was no accident." "What have you got there?" said the Dean. "Is that a vacuum container?" Lord Asriel didn't answer at first. Lyra heard the snap of metal clips and a hiss as air rushed into a vessel, and then there was silence. But the silence didn't last long. After a moment or two, Lyra heard a confused babble break out. Cries of horror, loud protests, voices raised in anger and fear. "But what? Hardly human. It's been... What happened to it?" The master's voice cut through them all. "Lord Asriel, what in God's name have you got there?" "This is the head of Stanislaus Grumman," said Lord Asriel's voice. I think that was his name. Stanislaus Grumman. Over the jumble of voices, Lyra heard someone stumble to the door and out, making incoherent sounds of distress. She wished she could see what they were seeing. Lord Asriel said, "I found his body preserved in the ice off Svalbard. The head was treated in this way by his killers. You'll notice the characteristic scalping pattern. I think you might be familiar with it, Sub-Rector." The old man's voice was steady as he said, I have seen the Tartars do this. It's a technique you find among the aboriginals of Siberia and the Tungusk. From there, of course, it spread into the lands of the Skraelings, though I understand that is now banned in New Denmark. May I examine it more closely, Lord Asriel? After a short silence, he spoke again. My eyes are not very clear, and the ice is dirty, but it seems to me that there is a hole in the top of the skull. Am I right? You are. Tree panning? Exactly. That caused a murmur of excitement. The master moved out of the way, and Lyra could see again. The old sub-rector, in the circle of light thrown by the lantern, was holding a heavy block of ice up close to his eyes, and Lyra could see the object inside it. A bloody lump, barely recognizable as a human head. Pan fluttered around Lyra, his distress affecting her. Hush, she whispered, listen. Dr. Grumman was once a scholar of this college, said the dean hotly. To fall into the hands of the Tartars, but that far north. They must have penetrated further than anyone imagined. Did I hear you say you found it near Svalbard? Said the dean. That's right. Are we to understand that the Panzerbjorn had anything to do with this? Lyra didn't recognize that word, but clearly the scholars did. Impossible, said the Cassington scholar firmly. They'd never behave in that manner. Then you don't know I4 Ragnarsson, let's call him that, okay? Then you don't know I4 Ragnarsson, said the Palmerian professor, who had made several expeditions himself to the Arctic regions. It wouldn't surprise me at all to learn that he had taken to sculpting people in the Tartar fashion. Lyra looked again at her uncle, who was watching the scholars with a glitter of sardonic amusement and saying nothing. Who is I4 Ragnarsson? Said someone. The king of Svalbard, said the Palmerian professor. Yes, that's right, one of the Panzerbjorn. He's a usurper of sorts, tricked his way onto the throne, or so I understand. But a powerful figure, by no means a fool, in spite of his ludicrous affections. Having a palace built of imported marble, setting up what he calls a university. For whom? For the bears, said someone else, and everyone laughed. But the Palmerian professor went on. For all that, I tell you that I4 Ragnarsson would be capable of doing this to Grumman. At the same time, he could be flattered into behaving quite differently if the need arose. And you know how, do you, Trelawney? Said the dean sneeringly. Indeed I do. Do you know what he wants above all else? Even more than an honorary degree. He wants a demon. Find a way to give him a demon, and he'd do anything for you. The scholars laughed heartily. Lyra was following this with puzzlement. What the Palmerian professor said made no sense at all. Besides, she was impatient to hear more about scalping and the Northern Lights, and that mysterious dust. But she was disappointed, for Lord Asriel had finished showing his relics and pictures, and the talk soon turned into a college wrangle about whether or not they should give him some money to fit out another expedition. Back and forth the arguments ranged, and Lyra felt her eyes closing. Back and forth the arguments ranged, and Lyra felt her eyes closing. Soon she was fast asleep, with Pan curled around her neck in his favourite sleeping form as an ermine. She woke up with a start when someone shook her shoulder. Quiet, said her uncle. The wardrobe door was open, and he was crouched there against the light. They've all gone, but there are still some servants around. Go to your bedroom now, and take care that you say nothing about this. Did they vote to give you the money? She said sleepily. Yes. What's dust? She said, struggling to stand up after having been cramped in for so long. Nothing to do with you. It is to do with me, she said. If you wanted me to be a spy in the wardrobe, you ought to tell me what I'm spying about. Can I see the man's head? Pan's white ermine fur bristled. She felt it tickling her neck. Lord Asriel laughed shortly. Don't be disgusting, he said, and began to pack his slides and specimen box. Did you watch the master? Yes, and he looked for the wine before he did anything else. Good. But I've scotched him for now. Do as you're told and go to bed. But where are you going? Back to the north. I'm leaving in 10 minutes. Can I come? He stopped what he was doing and looked at her as if for the first time. His demon turned her great green leopard eyes on her too, and under the concentrated gaze of both of them, Lyra blushed. But she gazed back fiercely. "Your place is here," her uncle said finally. "But why? Why is my place here?" And there we go. That is a fantastic 50 minutes of Philip Pullman's Northern Lights. So I'm going to make a little mark as to where we got up to. And it's all going on. Let's see what happens. Is Lyra going to go with Lord Asriel or not? Tune in next time and we'll find out. All right. So until then, go easy and have a lovely rest of the day. All right. Bye.
Stand up and fight, for you know we are right. We must strike at the lies that all spread like disease through our minds. Soon we'll have